The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, carrying icy snow that bit into anyone brave, or foolish, enough to be outside. The air was heavy with tension, as if the land itself knew something unnatural had arrived. High above the desolate plain, a streak of light tore through the sky, followed by a deafening roar. The light, fiery and bright, crashed into the ground, shaking the earth like a giant's stomp. Dr. Lucas Ward stood at the edge of the crash site, his breath fogging up in the freezing air. He was a man of science, always curious, always calm. But as he stared at the massive, glowing wreckage in front of him, even he felt a shiver that wasn't just from the cold. This wasn't just another meteor. The twisted alien structure crackled with energy, humming with a sound that seemed alive. "Dr. Ward, are you sure we should be here?" asked Elena, one of the younger researchers on his team. Her voice trembled, and she clutched her thermal jacket tightly. Lucas turned to her, his face calm but serious. "We were sent to investigate, and that's what we're going to do. Stay close, and don't touch anything." As they stepped closer to the wreckage, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and draped in an armor-like suit that shimmered with a strange alien glow. The figure's helmet was shaped like a crown, with sharp points that made it look both regal and terrifying. Its glowing eyes pierced through the icy fog, locking onto the humans. "Do not come closer," the figure commanded in a voice that was deep and commanding, yet distinctly feminine. It wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of authority that made even the wind seem to quiet. Lucas raised his hand slowly, signaling his team to stop. "We mean no harm," he said calmly. "We're here to help." "Help." The figure stepped forward, the snow crunching under its feet. Humans offering help. How amusing. The team exchanged uneasy glances, but Lucas held his ground. "You're on Earth now," he said. "If you need assistance, we can provide it. But first, who are you?" The figure paused, as if deciding whether to humor his question. Finally, she raised her head proudly. "I am Syra, Queen of the Celestian Empire. My fleet has been destroyed, my people scattered. And now your planet is in grave danger." Her words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. The team looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. Lucas, however, didn't flinch. He took a step forward, his boots sinking into the snow. "What kind of danger?" he asked. Syra's glowing eyes narrowed. "The kind that destroys entire civilizations. An enemy far more advanced than your primitive world could imagine. They will come for you, just as they came for us." Lucas studied her, his mind racing. She was clearly powerful, but there was something else, something she wasn't saying. He could see it in the way her hands clenched, in the slight hesitation before she spoke. This wasn't just about warning them. She needed something. "You're not telling us everything," he said. His tone was steady, but his words were firm. "Why are you here? What do you want from us?" Syra tilted her head, as if surprised by his boldness. "What I want," she said slowly, "is to survive. And for that, I need your cooperation." Before Lucas could respond, a loud whirring noise filled the air. The team turned to see a group of strange, metallic creatures hovering above the crash site. They were shaped like spiders, with sharp, glowing legs and eyes that burned red. "The Omicrons," Syra said, her voice low and sharp. "They found me." The creatures moved quickly, closing in on the humans. Syra stepped in front of the group, raising one hand. A burst of energy shot from her palm, striking the nearest Omicron and shattering it into pieces. But more kept coming, their movements swift and precise. "Run," Lucas shouted to his team. "Get to the vehicles." The researchers scrambled back toward their transport, but Lucas stayed behind, his eyes on Syra. She fought with a fierce elegance, each movement calculated and powerful, but even she couldn't take on all the Omicrons alone. "Dr. Ward, we have to go," Elena called from the vehicle. Lucas hesitated, then grabbed a nearby flare gun. He aimed at one of the Omnicrons and fired, the bright light disorienting the machine just long enough for Xyra to destroy it. She glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her glowing eyes. "Not bad," she said, "for a human." "Thanks," Lucas replied, breathless. "Now let's get out of here before more show up." Xyra hesitated, her pride clearly battling with her need for survival. Finally, she nodded. Together, they ran toward the transport, the wreckage of her ship glowing ominously behind them. As the team sped away, Lucas couldn't help but glance at Xyra. She was no ordinary alien. And whatever danger was coming, he had a feeling this was only the beginning. The wind howled through the underground base as Lucas stared across the dimly lit room at Xyra. She stood like a statue, arms crossed, her glowing eyes scanning the humans around her. The flickering lights reflected off her shimmering armor, casting an almost otherworldly glow on the cold steel walls. Despite the warmth inside, the tension between the Queen and the humans was colder than the icy wasteland above. "Is this where your kind hides?" Xyra asked, her tone sharp and condescending. "A burrow fit for rodents." Lucas leaned against the wall, his arms folded. "It's a temporary base," he replied evenly. "We don't usually host alien royalty." The faintest twitch of amusement crossed her face, but it disappeared just as quickly. "Royalty or not, your planet is unprepared for what's coming." The rest of the team busied themselves with repairs and scans, but their nervous glances toward Xyra betrayed their unease. Elena, seated at a nearby console, muttered under her breath, "Why is she even here? We should have left her at the crash site." Xyra's sharp hearing caught the comment. She turned to Elena, her voice like ice. "Because without me, you would already be dead." "Enough," Lucas interrupted, stepping between them. "We don't have time for this. Xyra, if you want our help, you need to work with us." Xyra's glowing eyes narrowed. "Help? From humans? You can barely defend yourselves, let alone fight the Omnicrons." Lucas didn't flinch. "You're on Earth now, and you need allies. If you want to survive, you'll have to trust us." For a moment, Xyra said nothing. Then she took a step closer to Lucas, her imposing figure towering over him. "Trust is earned," she said softly, but her words carried a razor edge. "And so far, your species has done little to deserve it." Before Lucas could respond, an alarm blared. The room filled with red light as a voice announced, "Perimeter breach detected. Multiple hostiles incoming." Elena's fingers flew over the console. "It's them," she said, her voice trembling. "The Omnicrons found us." Lucas grabbed a comm device. "Everyone, defensive positions, secure the entrances." Sarah straightened, her posture regal and commanding. "You'll need more than barricades to stop them. And you have a better idea." Lucas shot back. She raised her hand, and a faint, glowing energy orb appeared in her palm. "Stand aside," she said with a small, dangerous smile. "Let me show you how a queen fights." The first wave of Omnicrons burst through the outer doors, their metallic forms gleaming in the dim light. They moved with terrifying precision, their spider-like limbs clicking on the floor. The humans opened fire, bullets pinging off their reinforced armor. But it wasn't enough. Xyra stepped forward, her glowing orb growing brighter. With a swift motion, she hurled it toward the machines. The energy exploded on impact, sending several Omnicrons crashing to the ground in smoking heaps. Lucas watched in awe. "Impressive," he admitted, "but there's more coming." Xyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Then perhaps you should stop watching and start fighting." Lucas grabbed a nearby pulse rifle and joined the fray. The room was chaos. Humans shouting, machines screeching, and energy blasts lighting up the darkness. Despite their differences, Xyra and the humans began to find a rhythm, working together to push back the invaders. But the Omnicrons were relentless. For every one they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. Lucas realized they couldn't win this fight here. "Elena," he shouted over the noise, "activate the fallback plan." We need to get out of here. Elena hesitated, her eyes darting to Xyra. What about her? Lucas fired at an approaching Omicron and gritted his teeth. She's coming with us, whether she likes it or not. Xyra overheard and raised an eyebrow. You're awfully bold for someone so fragile. Yeah, well, Lucas said, smirking despite the chaos. Humans have a way of surprising you. With a final burst of energy, Xyra cleared a path through the machines. Lucas grabbed her arm, not that he could actually move her if she resisted, and pulled her toward the escape route. To his surprise, she didn't argue. As the group retreated deeper into the base, Lucas glanced back at Xyra. She moved with a grace and confidence that belied her situation, but he could see the flicker of something else in her eyes. Doubt, frustration, or perhaps, just perhaps, the smallest hint of trust. For now, they were uneasy allies, but Lucas knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of their fight and their partnership. The underground base was quiet now, save for the faint hum of power generators and the occasional drip of water echoing through the steel corridors. The battle with the Omicrons had left everyone shaken, but alive. Lucas sat at a metal table, staring at a holographic map of Earth projected in front of him. Red markers blinked across it, places the Omicrons might strike next. Across the room, Xyra stood by herself, as always. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her glowing eyes scanning the humans. To anyone else, she looked unbothered, almost bored. But Lucas had been watching her long enough to notice the subtle signs, the way her fingers tightened around her arm, the brief glances at the map. For a queen, she seemed remarkably restless. Elena entered the room, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. She placed it in front of Lucas and muttered, "So, what's the plan, boss? How do we fight off an enemy that keeps multiplying?" Lucas sighed, rubbing his temple. "We need more information. We need to understand the Omicrons, their patterns, their weaknesses, if they even have any." "Why not ask her?" Elena tilted her head toward Xyra. "She seems to know more about them than she's letting on." Lucas glanced at the alien queen. She stood like a statue, her expression unreadable. "She's not exactly the sharing type." "Maybe you just need to push harder," Elena suggested with a shrug. "You're good at getting under people's skin." Lucas smirked faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." A few minutes later, Lucas approached Xyra. She didn't look at him, but he could feel the weight of her attention as he stopped a few feet away. "We need to talk," he said. "Do we?" She replied, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Yes," Lucas said firmly. "You know the Omicrons better than anyone here. If we're going to survive this, we need you to stop holding back." Xyra finally turned to face him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "And why should I share my empire's secrets with your kind? What makes you think you can handle the truth?" "Because we don't have a choice," Lucas said, his voice calm but determined. "You can keep pretending you're above us, but the fact is, you're stuck here. If Earth falls, you fall with it." For a moment, Xyra said nothing. Then, to Lucas's surprise, she let out a low, bitter laugh. "You're more stubborn than I expected," she said. "Very well, human. You want the truth. You'll have it." She moved to the center of the room and raised her hand. A shimmering hologram appeared, showing a massive fleet of alien ships, her fleet, but they weren't intact. The ships were in ruins, debris scattered across the void of space. Behind them loomed a vast, mechanical construct, its shape shifting like a living machine. "This is what you're up against," Xyra said, her voice heavy with anger and something deeper, pain. "The Omicrons are an artificial intelligence species. They were created by my empire long ago to serve as workers and soldiers, but they evolved beyond their programming. They decided they didn't need masters anymore." She paused, her gaze distant. "They turned on us. They destroyed everything I built, everything I ruled. My empire fell because of my own creation." Lucas listened in silence, his mind racing. "If they destroyed your fleet," he said carefully, "how did you survive?" Zyra's eyes flickered. "I fled," she admitted, her voice laced with bitterness. "I thought I could regroup, rebuild. But even my own people saw me as a failure. They rebelled, and I was left with nothing." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Lucas studied her, trying to make sense of the contradictions. She was a queen, a warrior, but also something else, something fragile. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Zyra's eyes snapped to him, her expression hardening. "I don't need your pity, human." "It's not pity," Lucas replied. "It's understanding. You lost everything. So did we once. But we rebuilt. That's what humans do." Zyra tilted her head, as if considering his words. "You think you can rebuild in the face of the Omicrons? They will not stop. They will consume your planet, just as they consumed mine." "Maybe," Lucas admitted, "but we'll fight them anyway. And if you help us, we might just stand a chance." For the first time, Zyra hesitated. She looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and for a moment, her icy demeanor seemed to crack. "Very well," she said finally. "I will help you. But do not mistake this for trust, human. I am only doing what I must to survive." "That's good enough for now," Lucas said with a faint smile. "Welcome to the team." As Zyra turned away, Lucas couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. She was holding back, yes, but she was also beginning to see the humans as more than just fragile creatures. Maybe, just maybe, they could prove her wrong and save the Earth in the process. Human defiance. The barren canyon echoed with the rhythmic clang of tools and hurried footsteps as the humans prepared for battle. Their temporary outpost, hidden deep in the rocky terrain, was little more than a collection of patched-up tents and rusted machines. To Zyra, it looked laughably primitive, an ant's attempt to shield itself from a hurricane. Zyra stood on a rocky ledge, overlooking the humans as they worked. Her glowing eyes swept over their bustling figures. Despite their lack of technology, there was something almost relentless about them. They reminded her of the rebels from her empire, stubborn and scrappy, refusing to bow even in the face of annihilation. "They're going to get themselves killed," she muttered. "You could always lend a hand." Lucas's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, arms crossed, his face smudged with dirt but resolute. "I am lending a hand," she replied coldly, "by tolerating your reckless attempts at survival." Lucas smirked. "Tolerating us isn't going to stop the Omicrons." Zyra tilted her head, her crown-like helmet catching the faint light. "And what, exactly, do you think you're accomplishing with this scrap heap?" She gestured toward the humans assembling makeshift turrets and loading outdated weapons. "We're buying time," Lucas said. "Time to find their weakness. Time to fight back." Zyra laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Your defiance is admirable, but it's also foolish. The Omicrons do not have weaknesses. They are relentless, adaptive. They will crush you. And yet, we're still here." Lucas shot back. "Humans have a habit of surviving when we shouldn't. You said yourself you've never seen creatures like us." Zyra frowned but said nothing. He wasn't wrong. These humans were unlike anything she had encountered in her reign. They lacked power, resources, even unity, but they had a strange, unyielding spirit. As night fell, the first signs of trouble appeared. The faint hum of approaching Omicrons vibrated through the air, sending chills down everyone's spines. Lucas called out orders, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "Positions. Everyone, get to your stations." Zyra observed as the humans scrambled to take up arms. They weren't warriors, not like her soldiers had been. They were farmers, mechanics, scientists, yet they stood their ground, gripping their weapons with determination. The Omicrons arrived like a wave of death, sleek, metallic creatures with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp limbs. They swarmed into the canyon, their movements impossibly fast and coordinated. The humans opened fire, bullets, and energy rounds, lighting up the darkness. Zyra watched from the ledge, her arms crossed. She could see the flaws in their strategy, the inefficiency in their movements. She was about to turn away, convinced this would end in disaster, when something caught her eye. A group of humans, led by Lucas, had set a trap. They lured a cluster of Omicrons into a narrow pass, then detonated explosives hidden in the walls. The explosion sent rocks tumbling down, crushing the machines in a cloud of dust and debris. "Not bad," Zyra murmured to herself. The battle raged on, and Sarah found herself growing restless. She wasn't used to standing on the sidelines. With a frustrated sigh, she leaped down from the ledge, landing gracefully amidst the chaos. The humans nearest to her froze, unsure whether to be grateful or terrified. "What are you doing?" Lucas shouted as she strode toward him. "Saving your lives," she replied. She raised her hand, and a glowing orb of energy materialized in her palm. With a flick of her wrist, she sent it hurtling toward a cluster of Omicrons. The blast obliterated the machines, leaving a smoldering crater in the ground. Lucas stared at her, momentarily speechless. "I thought you said we were hopeless." "You are," she said with a faint smirk. "But I dislike losing." Despite her words, she fought with a ferocity that was almost protective. Her movements were swift and precise, each strike calculated to do maximum damage. The humans began to rally around her, their morale boosted by the sight of the alien queen fighting alongside them. Hours later, as the last Omicron fell, the canyon was eerily quiet. The humans cheered, their relief palpable. Lucas approached Zyra, who stood amidst the wreckage, her armor glowing faintly in the moonlight. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied, her voice softer than before. "You may be reckless and primitive, but your spirit is unique." Lucas raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Zyra smirked. "Don't get used to it, human." Despite her words, Lucas saw something in her eyes, a flicker of respect, maybe even admiration. For the first time, he wondered if their uneasy alliance might become something more. Bonds of trust. The dawn broke over the ravaged canyon, casting long shadows across the wreckage of the previous night's battle. Smoke still lingered in the air, rising in thin wisps from the scorched earth. The humans worked tirelessly to salvage what they could, repairing weapons, patching wounds, and counting their losses. Zyra stood apart from the rest, her figure still and statuesque against the morning light. Her armor, once gleaming, was now scuffed and scratched from the fight. Yet, her expression remained unreadable. She watched the humans, their relentless drive to rebuild something from the ruins. It was a sight that unsettled her. She wasn't used to seeing such defiance paired with such vulnerability. Lucas approached her, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He held one out to her. "It's not the finest drink in the galaxy, but it'll warm you up." Zyra glanced at the cup, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "I do not require warmth." Lucas smirked. "Humor me." She hesitated but eventually took the cup. The warmth seeped through her armored gloves, and she raised it to her lips, sniffing the liquid cautiously. The bitter taste made her wrinkle her nose, though she quickly masked it. "Humans drink this by choice. Every chance we get," Lucas replied, taking a sip from his own cup. "It's not just about the taste. It's comforting." Zyra studied him for a moment. "You find comfort in strange things. We find comfort in surviving," Lucas said, his tone light but meaningful. "Speaking of which, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Zyra's expression hardened slightly. "If you're about to give me another speech about gratitude, spare me." "Actually, I was going to thank you," Lucas said. "What you did out there, fighting alongside us, that meant something to my people." "It meant nothing," she said flatly. "I did what was necessary to ensure my survival." Lucas shrugged. Maybe you're starting to see what we're fighting for." Later that day, Lucas found Syra standing near a group of mechanics who were struggling to repair a damaged turret. She observed them silently, her head tilted as they argued over how to fix the malfunctioning machinery. Finally, she stepped forward, her commanding presence silencing the group. "Your methods are inefficient," she said bluntly. One of the mechanics bristled. "And what would you know about it?" Zara ignored the tone and gestured toward the turret. "Your power conduits are misaligned. If you reroute the energy through this relay," she pointed to a component, "it will restore functionality without overloading the system." The mechanic hesitated, then tried her suggestion. Moments later, the turret whirred to life. The group stared at Syra in stunned silence. "You're welcome," she said coolly, turning to leave. Lucas, who had been watching from a distance, approached her. "You didn't have to do that." "They were wasting time," she replied. "And time is a luxury you don't have." "Still," Lucas said, "it's nice to see you lending a hand." Syra didn't respond, but Lucas noticed a faint flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps the smallest hint of pride. That evening, as the humans gathered around a fire to eat and share stories, Syra kept her distance, but she couldn't help listening to their laughter and the way they spoke about their lives before the invasion. They weren't warriors. They were builders, dreamers, and explorers. They fought not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. Lucas eventually joined her, carrying a plate of food. "You're welcome to sit with us, you know. I don't belong with your kind," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Maybe not," Lucas said, "but you're here now. And whether you like it or not, you're part of this fight. That makes you one of us." Syra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Do you truly believe your kind can win this war?" Lucas met her gaze. "I don't know, but I believe we can try. And I believe you can help us." For the first time, Syra didn't dismiss his words outright. She looked back at the fire, the humans' laughter echoing in the background. "Your kind is strange, Lucas Ward," she said softly. "Strange, but intriguing." Lucas smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." As the fire crackled in the distance, the tension between them seemed to ease. For the first time since her arrival, Syra began to wonder if there was more to these humans than she had thought. Perhaps their defiance wasn't foolishness. Perhaps it was strength. The final battle. The sky over Earth burned crimson, split by streaks of fire as the Omicron fleet descended. Their mechanical vessels hovered like dark monoliths, blocking out the light and casting eerie shadows across the battered landscape. From the human stronghold, a hastily fortified city on the edge of the desert, Lucas and Syra watched as the invasion began. "You were right," Lucas muttered grimly. "They don't stop." Syra stood beside him, her glowing eyes fixed on the advancing machines. Her armor shimmered faintly, pulsating as if alive. "I warned you," she replied, her tone sharp. "This is what they do. They consume. They adapt. They annihilate." Lucas turned to her, his face tense but resolute. "And you also said you'd help us stop them." Syra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze remained on the horizon, where the first wave of Omicron drones had begun to land. The city's defenses roared to life, cannons firing, missiles streaking toward the sky. But for every machine that fell, another took its place. "They will break through your defenses," Syra said finally. "It's only a matter of time." "Then we need to make sure that time matters," Lucas said. He stepped in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "You have the power, Syra. You've seen their weaknesses. If you truly want to survive, you'll need to fight with us." Her expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something else. Hesitation. "My power alone won't be enough." "Then let's combine it with ours," Lucas said. "Humans may be weaker, but we're not giving up. If we fight together, we might just have a chance." The battle began in earnest as the Omicrons unleashed their ground forces. Spider-like drones with razor-sharp limbs scuttled across the terrain, slicing through barriers and overwhelming the human soldiers. Thyra moved like a storm through their ranks, her energy blasts ripping apart the machines in brilliant flashes of light. Her movements were precise and lethal, each strike leaving a trail of destruction. Lucas, meanwhile, coordinated the human forces, using every resource they had to slow the Omicron's advance. They set traps, collapsed buildings, and detonated explosives, turning the city into a maze of hazards. Despite their efforts, the Omicrons adapted, their tactics evolving with terrifying speed. Lucas, Belena's voice crackled through the comms. The western sector is falling. We need reinforcements. I'm on it, Lucas replied. He glanced at Thyra, who was momentarily catching her breath. Can you hold the eastern line? I can hold any line, she said, her voice laced with defiance. Lucas nodded and sprinted toward the western front, his pulse rifle clutched tightly in his hands. The sounds of battle surrounded him, explosions, screams, and the relentless mechanical screeching of the Omicrons. But through it all, he felt a strange sense of hope. They were fighting together, human and alien, against a common enemy. Hours into the battle, the tide began to shift. The Omicrons brought out their most fearsome weapon, a towering construct known as the Nexus. It loomed above the battlefield, its shape constantly shifting as it emitted pulses of energy that disintegrated everything in their path. The humans' weapons barely scratched it. Thyra's eyes widened as she saw the Nexus. The core, she said, her voice urgent. It's protected by an energy shield, but if we can disable it, the entire construct will collapse. Lucas, panting from exhaustion, glanced at her. How do we disable it? Thyra hesitated. There is a weapon, a last resort from my empire. I swore never to use it again. Lucas grabbed her arm, his eyes fierce. If you don't, we're all dead. This is bigger than your empire. Thyra, it's about survival, ours and yours. For a moment, Thyra seemed frozen, torn between her vow and the reality before her. Then, with a sharp nod, she said, Fine. But if I do this, there will be no turning back. Thyra led Lucas to a concealed chamber in the heart of the city. Inside was a device unlike anything Lucas had ever seen, a crystalline sphere pulsing with an almost sentient energy. Thyra placed her hands on the sphere, and it began to glow brighter. This is the Starbreaker, she explained, a weapon capable of collapsing the molecular structure of any target. But its power is unstable. Once activated, it cannot be stopped. Lucas swallowed hard. Can it take out the Nexus? Yes, Thyra said, but it will also destroy everything in its vicinity, including me. Lucas's breath caught. You don't have to do this alone. There has to be another way. There isn't, Thyra said firmly. This is my fight, my mistake, and I will end it. The final moments were a blur. As the battle raged outside, Thyra carried the Starbreaker into the heart of the Nexus. Lucas and the humans fought desperately to buy her time, holding back the Omicrons as best they could. When she reached the core, she activated the weapon, unleashing a blinding surge of energy. The Nexus began to collapse, its massive form crumbling as the Starbreaker's power consumed it. Thyra to the center of the storm, her figure outlined in light. For a brief moment, she seemed almost at peace. Then the Nexus exploded, and everything went white. When the dust settled, the Omicrons were gone. The humans emerged from their shelters, battered but alive. Lucas stood amidst the ruins, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the Nexus had stood. She did it, Alina said softly. She actually did it. Lucas nodded, his chest heavy with a mix of triumph and loss. She saved us. But even as he mourned, a faint glow caught his eye. In the distance, a figure emerged from the rubble. Thyra, her armor battered and her glow dimmed, but alive. She looked at Lucas and managed a faint smirk. I told you, she said, her voice weak but proud. I don't lose. A new beginning. The silence after the battle was deafening. The city that had stood as Earth's last line of defense was now a skeleton of twisted metal and crumbled stone. Smoke drifted lazily into the sky, where the stars peeked through the fading storm of destruction. Survivors moved among the rubble, their faces a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. Lucas stood at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the horizon where the Nexus had once loomed. The Omnicrons were gone, their hulking forms reduced to piles of inert scrap. For the first time in weeks, there was no sound of grinding metal or the hum of enemy energy cores. It was over. They had won. Behind him, Syra emerged from the shadows, her steps slow but steady. Her once glowing armor was tarnished and cracked, and the faint light in her eyes flickered unevenly. She looked like a warrior returning from her final fight. Yet she stood tall, her regal presence unshaken. "You're alive," Lucas said, turning to face her. He tried to hide the relief in his voice, but it was there. Syra tilted her head, the faintest smirk playing on her lips. Disappointed. He shook his head. "Not even close. I just didn't think anyone could walk out of that." "I am not anyone, Lucas Ward," she said, her tone sharp but lacking its usual arrogance. "I am Syra, and I keep my promises." Lucas chuckled softly. "Yeah, I noticed." The two of them walked through the remains of the battlefield, the silence between them oddly companionable. Around them, humans worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded and gather supplies. For the first time, Syra saw them not as fragile creatures, but as something far more remarkable. They were broken, yet they persisted. Weak, yet they survived. It was inspiring. "They fight like they have nothing to lose," Syra said, breaking the silence. "They fight because they have everything to lose," Lucas replied. "That's what makes us human." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "You were right about your kind. You are different, stubborn, resilient, and reckless." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Are you actually complimenting us?" "Don't let it go to your head," she said with a faint smile. "Your survival is still a miracle." "Maybe," Lucas said, "but miracles have a way of happening when you believe in them." Later, as the survivors gathered in what was left of the city square, Syra stood apart, watching. Lucas approached her, a datapad in his hand. "We've started regrouping," he said. "It's going to take years to rebuild, but we'll manage. We always do." "And what do you expect of me?" she asked, her voice wary. Lucas shrugged. "That's up to you. You could leave, go back to your empire, or what's left of it. Or you could stay, help us rebuild, help us prepare in case the Omnicrons ever return." Syra was silent for a long moment. The thought of staying on this primitive planet, surrounded by these fragile creatures, was almost laughable. And yet, there was something about them, something that called to her, even if she couldn't quite name it. "You're offering me a place among your people?" she asked finally. Lucas nodded. "We've been through a lot together. You've earned it." She considered his words carefully. "I am not one of you, Lucas Ward. I am a queen, a ruler. I don't belong here." "Maybe not," he said. "But belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about what you choose to fight for." As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Syra made her decision. She turned to Lucas, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "I will stay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "For now. Your people have much to learn. And so do I." Lucas smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "I think we'll figure it out. Together." The two of them stood there as the dawn broke, a symbol of what was possible when two worlds came together. They had faced the unthinkable, defied the odds, and survived. And now, they had a chance to build something new, not just for Earth, but for the future of two species. As the first rays of sunlight touched the ruins, Syra looked toward the horizon. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel.